There is something to be said about lewd franchises that gained popularity and got Western releases further into their series, with the originals just kind of getting lost in Japan. One example of this is Galgun. We got double piece on the Vita and 2 on the Switch, while the original was just remastered and brought west earlier this year. We're getting a little deja vu with that trend, as another game that coincidentally also originally released back in 2011 has come west in the Akiba's Trip series, or Akiba Strip, if you'd prefer to say it that way. Here is my review of Akiba's Trip, Hellbound, and Debriefed for the Nintendo Switch. Akiba's Trip takes place in Akihabara. You play as a young man that tries to save his friend from beings that suck the blood of humans, or in other words, vampires. After your rescue is botched and one of them ends up saving your life by sharing her blood and power, you are recruited into a certain organization. Their goal, and therefore yours, is to fight off against these Shadow Soul vampires and protect Akiba from being attacked by them. The power this person gave you also brings with it a special means of fighting against these vampires. How do you ask?
You need this raw desire to rip their clothes off and expose their soft, hidden skin.
As those words settle into your brain, this is one of those wacky, lewd stories. The game is filled with sexual humor and a big focus on otaku culture in general. If you can get into that, it is a hilarious little adventure, though there is a decent story here outside of this sexual humor. When it comes to gameplay, this is a 3D beat-em-up RPG. As you go through each area, you dress yourself in clothing armor and fight off vampires with literally anything you can buy or grab onto. To begin, Akiba's Trip was originally a PlayStation Portable title that released in 2011. It was then enhanced on the PSP a year later with extra features and content in the form of Akiba's Trip Plus. In technical terms, this is a remaster of a remaster, though don't expect any new content outside of the English dub. Progressing through this game is a matter of exploring different areas of Akiba and fulfilling story missions. You've got a cell phone that you can use to keep up to date on what you're supposed to be doing, as well as what NPCs are talking about via social media. Though you're mostly going to be pointed towards story and side mission objectives that point you to a certain region. Speaking of region, fans of the second entry will notice that Akiba is a bit smaller this time around. The series has been known for having an accurate representation of Akihabara, and that is still the case in this original game. However, the second entry was borderline open world, and this one has much smaller areas with a point-to-point map. One of the game's most interesting aspects of these areas you visit are encounters. Outside of NPCs that will come up to fight you, there are scripted little encounters you will have with other NPCs that endlessly spawn in and out of each area, not only for their little encounters, but also reacting to what you've done. What starts as guys coming up to steal your money and maids inviting you to their cafe will later turn into people knowing who you are and reacting based on what the people of Akiba think of you and your reputation. And rep is a big part of this game. You've got 3 different factions of people that wander through Akiba, and your actions towards each of them will dictate whether they like or hate you. Go around attacking random NPCs for the fun of it, or simply to grind for levels and item drops, and that reputation will drop with it. If a group starts to dislike or hate you, their NPCs will actively seek you out and fight you in the streets. Let it keep dropping and those NPCs will appear more frequently and in much larger groups, interfering with not only exploration, but missions as well. If this happens, you've got to do a side mission that involves you making a public apology to that faction, which can be even harder to do if that faction's NPCs are surrounding and fighting you while you try to talk to another and apologize. The game sets in stone pretty early that you have to be careful who you pick fights with. Speaking of fighting and grinding, let's go into the combat system. This is a beat-em-up game where you can attack enemies' clothing. The idea is that you expose the vampire's skin to sunlight and let that sunlight obliterate them. You reveal their skin by beating them down and stripping the clothes right off of them. Now, this is a pretty decent system of attacking low, mid, and high parts and weakening them to the point of doing button-holding QTEs to remove their clothes. though this being the first game brings a lot of clunky and stiffness to the combat. A lot of weapons' reach is very hard to detect, and being surrounded makes it difficult to lock onto who you want. What really makes the combat of the game fun is what you use for weapons. From wielding a glove or sword to a laptop and even a body pillow, you can beat down the vampires with just about anything. It's a really wacky and dumb fun part of this game. Now let's talk difficulty. This isn't really a hard game, but the clunkiness of combat and potential interruptions with low reputation can make it frustrating. The first thing you need to know is that you can only change equipment from the map screen, something the game neglected to inform me of. But once you're well equipped, it is pretty acceptable on difficulty. You just gotta watch out for getting trapped in corners and keeping your reputation up, as the NPC mobs that attack you for low rep will interrupt missions and story content, giving you a task of fighting one opponent to fighting one opponent and the mob of office workers that want revenge for something you did earlier. As all of this comes together, the game has a decent amount of content and length. If you stick with it, you'll be spending around 15 hours or so until you get your first ending. Now, if you want to see the other endings, you can easily add more content on top of that, but we're looking at a minimum of around 15 hours. Next up is presentation, where the age of this game really shows. This is a remaster, and the visuals definitely don't benefit much from the new platforms. It looks okay, but the character models look very diagonal, and there's a ton of blurring in all of the textures. This kind of thing looked pretty impressive on the PSP, but definitely not as much here. We also need to talk about the audio. Now, first of all, I totally get that we are still in the middle of a pandemic and things are difficult to do. But the English dub of this game has a clear quality difference between characters. Many of the voice recordings were done on microphones of varying quality and environment, and it is very easy to tell. Some of the English dub actors sound great, while others will chime into a conversation clearly having a significantly lower quality mic with a lot more graininess and proximity effect going on.
Regardless of all that, the human is... You strip who you want, and I'll strip who I want.
Now, this might be easier for me to pick out because I've been extremely nitpicky about my own audio for these videos for years. I recently abandoned the amazing SM7B microphone for an Elgato Wave 3 because it fits my voice a little bit better. So when you play this game, you might not even hear the difference in these voice acting recordings, but it is super obvious when I listen to it. With performance, things are okay. The game stays around 30 frames per second for the most part, but some areas give you a lot of frame drops, and handheld mode definitely makes these happen a lot more frequently. Outside of this is an odd glitch and mishap I noticed pretty early on. When you are fighting groups of enemies, you will occasionally glitch out and not be able to move around or attack until you jump or are attacked by other enemies. But that's enough about that. Let's dive into battery life. Akiba's Trip gives the original Switch model a range of 3 to 4 hours, the Switch Lite gets a range of 3 to 4.5 hours, and the Redbox or V2 2019 model gets a range of 5 to 6.5. In conclusion, the original Akiba's Trip has come to the handheld world with all of its lewd humor and jokes about otaku culture. While I did appreciate experiencing the original game, the amount of issues really hurts it. Even not accounting for the PSP visuals, the performance glitches, stiff combat, and very odd English dub quality issues make it something that fans of the series will want to experience, but anyone else may want to thoroughly research before buying. Reviews to go rates Akiba's Trip, Hellbound, and Debriefed for the Nintendo Switch a 6 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.